To some more virtual notes. Today we're going to be learning about the human genome, which essentially is the human collection of all of our DNA, all of the different genetic sequences that make us us. And understanding the genome is actually really important to understanding the different diseases, the different types of conditions that might exist in humans and how to treat them, as well as how to encourage more healthy parts of our body from continuing, maintaining brain health, a lot of different pieces of the puzzle we can solve just by learning more about the genetic code that builds the human body. So because of copywriting, I can't actually show the video in these video notes. I have it linked on the page on Schoology. I highly, highly recommend watching this video. I think it's an excellent video regarding the human code and how that then influences basically our everyday life. So that's the video. Once again, I can't show it because of copywriting purposes, but I'll have it posted on Schoology so you guys can watch it. Either pause this video, hop over to that one, or you can watch it at the end of these slides here. So what is a genome? A genome is the report of full DNA makeup of an organism. So essentially every single nucleotide that makes up our DNA. And once again, that DNA, those are the genetic instructions that code for an individual. And understanding that, as I mentioned before, will unlock insight into all of the different genes that make us unique and give us some idea on how to then use this understanding, use this knowledge to increase human health, increase human lifespan, and overall enjoyment of life, right? That's the goal. So I'm going to walk us through 23andMe. This is a program, if you're not aware of it, it's essentially a genetic sequencing program. So I did it way back when it first started in high school, actually, to figure out why I was experiencing just a few different conditions such as like having stomach aches all the time, headaches a lot, and they wanted to see if it was because of some traits that I had. And so what's awesome about 23andMe, this isn't an ad, this is just to go over kind of my experience and show you guys the information that we got from just looking at my genotype, is some information about ancestry, health, and traits, and then it also helps link me to family and friends, and also contributes to research in the field of science. So let's kind of go through page by page just to see what I learned based off of my DNA. So when I look at my ancestry composition, I am primarily French and German, which is really funny because growing up I was always told I'm Italian, 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 and as you can see here, I'm about 50% French and German, 13.6% British and Irish, 13.4% Scandinavian, and only 8% Italian. So I'm really not as Italian as my family always told me, but I think it's really interesting to be able to see where I come from. And I have some Eastern European here and then some broad European, but whenever people ask me, hey, what's your background? I just say European. I'm just a mix of everything. And I actually am able to track some of my relatives from Ireland, I believe. His name was Leif Erikson, not Leif Erikson. His name was Olaf Viking, so as you can imagine, his last name is Viking. He's probably from a lineage of Vikings. So one of these days I really want to go to Ireland and Scotland and explore my mom's side of the family, because apparently there's some nobility there. We have a castle from generations ago, so that'd be really cool. Anyway, so this is my ancestry composition. And what's also pretty rad is the way that they show a timeline of essentially how many generations ago I had recent ancestors for each population. So it looks like we kind of started out Italian, Eastern European, and then as my ancestors kind of migrated around and moved, they became more concentrated towards this area. So that's pretty cool. And then I don't have either of my parents here, but this actually shows me my chromosomes. So remember, I have 23. I have 2 X chromosomes because I'm a female. So this actually is then able to break down that essentially location from where my ancestors came based off of the similarities that we have in our chromosomes. And then there's one other little piece of information, I wonder if I can find it for you, that regards how much Neanderthal DNA I have. Let me see if I can find it here. That was always so funny in terms of the Neanderthal DNA. Here we go. Neanderthal ancestry. So I have about 2% Neanderthal DNA, and I have, let's see, more DNA than about 70% of other individuals who have done this test. And I think this is funny because I told this to my husband, and he always brought it up of like, oh, you're a Neanderthal. Not in a mean way, but just as a teasing way. Because if you know my dad, kind of looks like that. And then so I got my husband the 23andMe test for his Christmas gift a few years ago. He has the same exact amount of Neanderthal DNA as I do. So now we're the same. So that was kind of funny there. But and then it talks about how Neanderthal DNA influences my traits. So for example, these are all assumptions based off of what my DNA tells them, but I, for example, have one variant that I might have inherited from Neanderthals that helped me be less likely to have a fear of heights. And that's true. I love being up high. I've worked for ziplining companies. When I was working in Costa Rica, always up in the trees, having to collect stuff for the sloths. I was constantly on top of our release cage, which was about 20 feet high, just climbing around because I really like being up high and up in the trees and, I don't know, feeling like I'm flying. I have one variant associated with being a better sprinter than distance runner. This is kind of true. I can run really, really fast for a short period of time, but I also can run a really long time, but at a slow pace. When I was on the triathlon team, I definitely wasn't the fastest by any means, but I could run for a decent amount of time. We have one variant associated with being more likely to sweat during workout. I definitely do. And then this one here is interesting. I have one variant associated with having more dandruff, but I don't actually have dandruff at all. So that's cool. And then one variant associated with being less likely to blush easily. That is, I think, true. I never have noticed myself blush at all, even when I'm embarrassed. But then again, I can't always see my face, so maybe I am and I'm just not aware of it. So then looking at here, my health and traits, this will go into some background of different health risks I might have just based off of my DNA. I have to update my tests because, once again, I did mine a really long time ago when this was first started. There's a lot more that can be learned, but I would need to take an updated test. But what I can do is look at, for example, my carrier status. These are all different things that I might potentially be a carrier of based off of my DNA. And as you can see here, I'm not a carrier of any of these things. The variant is not detected in my DNA. So that's rad. That's one thing that I actually had to do when I was pregnant to make sure that I wasn't potentially carrying anything that I could pass on to my son. So I'm looking here at my health predispositions. Age-related macular degeneration essentially just means that as I get older, my eyesight might get worse. I'm not at an increased risk. Pretty much everybody goes through that, so that's that. For celiac disease, this is actually why I had to do 23andMe in the first place, because I always had stomach issues, and there was the idea that maybe it's because I was allergic to gluten intolerant, and that I might have celiac disease. So as you can see here, I have a slightly increased risk of having celiac disease, which means that I shouldn't eat a lot of gluten, which means like wheat, barley, basically anything that's really good, cookies, cake, etc. I still do sometimes because it tastes really yummy and I just deal with the tummy ache. But otherwise, for these other traits, let's see, for this one, variant not detected, one variant not determined. Interesting. So this is always changing. Whenever I look at it, it's always interesting to see. And then let's see, anything else interesting on this page that I want to show you guys? I think that the traits is really cool. Ooh, let's do wellness too. Let's just go through all of them because I just think they're interesting. So this has to do with like alcohol flush reaction. That just means like whether or not you get a red face when you drink alcohol. I don't know. I've never actually drinking alcohol before. It's just not my thing. So I can't tell you if this is true or not. Caffeine consumption. I actually don't drink coffee or tea. I mean, that's not true. I'm drinking iced coffee right now, but it's decaf. The only reason I get coffee is because my husband works for Starbucks and gives me an excuse to stop by and say hi in the morning. But he's quitting soon, so I don't know if I'll continue drinking my half-calf or decaf coffee once he quits. Deep sleep. I am not a deep sleeper whatsoever. I am such a light sleeper that you could like open the door and I'll wake up. You can whisper my name, Hannah. I'm like, what? What do we need? So I'm a really light sleeper. I'm predisposed, way about average. I'm tolerant of lactose. I have the muscle composition common in elite power athletes, which is rad. I can't say that I'm using it right now to its advantage, but maybe once I have more free time, I can start working out again and see how powerful I actually am. And then this is kind of just likely average and more average. I don't really think I move a lot in my sleep. But once again, I'm asleep. I don't know. Maybe I do. And then finally here, as I'm showing you guys just all these different things about me, you probably didn't think that you were going to learn a bunch about Mrs. Burns in this lesson here. Are just general traits. So, for example, cheek dimples. I have a higher chance of not having cheek dimples. That's true. I don't have any. This one's interesting. I have a high chance of not having a cleft chin. You can see I have a pretty clear cleft chin. There's a little notch right here in the middle of my chin right here. So not all of these are correct. Once again, I don't have dandruff, so that's that. Detached earlobes. Mine are stretched, so it's kind of hard to tell, but I do have detached earlobes. I think I have wet, sticky earwax. It's definitely not flaky, so that's a little bit TMI, but you know. High chance of having dark brown eyes, but I think I have more like hazel. I don't know. I've always liked my eyes. Probably can't see because there's not a lot of light here, but yeah. Finger length ratio. Chance that my index finger is longer than my ring finger. That's not true. So once again, our DNA doesn't always tell us for sure everything. Sometimes there's some differences that might exist, and we'll learn about that later on. 51% chance that I have lots of freckles. I don't. I'm not wearing any makeup on like my face. I'm not wearing foundation, and you can see, other than pimple scars, I don't have any freckles. I do experience hair photo bleaching. When I was a kid, if anytime I spent time out, like during the summer out in the sun, my hair would go from brown to blonde just because the sun would bleach it. That's what it's called, photo bleaching. It's bleaching in your hair as a response to sunlight. I have slightly wavy hair, that's correct. I also have light brown hair. I had actually a lot of hair when I was born, and so did my son. Notice how a lot of these that are kind of on the fence, it's like almost 50-50. I do not have red hair, though both myself and my husband have Scottish and Irish lineage, so there was a chance that we might have passed on the gene for red hair to our son. So he didn't, but I thought that would have been really funny. I don't have very fair skin. I actually am decently tan for being pretty much Northern European. I tan really fast too. So I'm sure if I spent like a lot of time out of the sun, I'd probably be pretty fair, but I don't burn easily at all. I do have stretch marks because I had a growth spurt, and you get stretch marks when you have growth spurt. That's just something that happens. I'm not going to show you guys my toes, but I think I have a longer big toe. Unibrow, I do have a little bit of a unibrow. And widow's peak, I don't have a widow's peak, and you can actually see perfectly because my head is shaved. It goes in a little bit here, but it doesn't like point. So those are all of the different genes and traits that have been kind of predicted based off of the information that my DNA passes on. One other thing that there's more tabs. Interesting. I do prefer sweet. I think I can smell asparagus. I definitely can taste bitter. I don't mind cilantro. I can match musical pitch pretty well. I more likely than average to be afraid of heights. See, but I'm not. I love heights. I don't have thin hair, but I don't have thick hair. I do not like chewing sounds. I hate ASMR when people do like a mukbang or when they like talk really quietly. Not my thing. Not my thing. I am bitten a lot by mosquitoes. When I was in Costa Rica, I would be covered in mosquitoes. And then my research partner, Tom, not a single mosquito on him. I'm like, what's going on? Why am I getting bit so much more than you? I also think it's because he ate pretty much garlic and onion every single day, so he smelled really bad, but that then masked the smell of human blood to the mosquitoes. So, maybe sometimes it's worth it to smell stinky if that means you're not going to get bit by so many mosquitoes. I do experience motion sickness sometimes, not all the time. I do not have a photic sneeze reflex, but my husband and my son do. What this means is essentially if you're exposed to sunlight, then you'll sneeze. So if you walk outside and you sneeze pretty often, then you probably have a photic sneeze reflex. Wake up time. I wake up a lot earlier than 8:51 a.m. But I also have been used to waking up really early for a while now, so I think that it's kind of worked into my body. But I normally wake up with the sun, and I like to do that. That feels nice. So last thing that I wanted to show you guys really quickly here, I'll show you the research page, and I'm going to tell you a little story before I go over to the last page here. When I was going over this for the first time, actually, in front of one of my other classes here, I discovered a relative that I didn't know I had. And it isn't like a super distant relative. This was like a first cousin. And it's really interesting because when I was a kid, I was told that I had a first cousin that I would never meet. And it was just because of like family drama, some really weird stuff that happened back when I was a kid. And I was never told about it. I never knew what actually had happened. But from 23andMe, it turns out that that first cousin did one of these kits, and they showed up on my family tree. So now I kind of know who they are. I haven't reached out to them. I haven't tried to contact them or anything because from what I understand, they don't want to be contacted. But I thought it was cool. I was like, whoa, that's that cousin that I had no idea who they were. And now because of just looking at genetics and putting a family tree together, I was able to figure out that long-lost cousin. I don't know if I'll actually be able to show you this family tree. It's taking a while to load, but we'll see. We'll come back to it, maybe at the end of our slides. So that being said, now let's go ahead and jump back into our genetic slides, and then we'll revisit that to see if my family tree loads. So when it comes to actually analyzing our DNA, we do something that's called karyotyping. And karyotyping essentially matches all of our chromosomes to their homologous pair. Remember, if we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, then homologous pair would mean 2 of chromosome 1, 2 of chromosome 2, etc. And then a karyotype just shows all of those diploids, all of those pairs of those homologous chromosomes. And they are normally arranged in order of decreasing size. So going from 1 to 22, and then these are the sex chromosomes X and Y. So establishing a karyotype can really be helpful for diagnosing different health conditions such as Down syndrome, which is also known as trisomy 21. And the reason that it's called trisomy 21 is because they have 3 copies of chromosome 21. And you might not think that that's a bad thing, but sometimes having an extra chromosome can change the way that our proteins are then created. And then in terms of Down syndrome, that actually then causes the symptoms. So more is not always better. So in terms of types of chromosomes, 2 of our chromosomes determine an individual's sex, so X or Y. Females have 2 X chromosomes, males have an X and a Y chromosome. And because of the process of meiosis, half of our sperm carry a Y chromosome and the other half carry an X, which is why in general, the world population is about 50-50, females to males. And so you can see here as an example, the X chromosome has a lot of information on it. Meanwhile, the Y chromosome doesn't really. The Y chromosome's only going to tell you if you're a male and how your sperm developed. So you can't really exist if you only have a Y chromosome. You can exist if you only have an X chromosome. And that's just because the X chromosome actually has a lot more genetic information on it. Y chromosome just tells you, hey, you're going to have sperm and a penis. So the autosomal chromosomes are the other 44, or the other 22 pairs. Each homologous chromosome pair, remember 2 of the same number, have their own set of genes. One set comes from mom, the other comes from dad. And so here's a just kind of chart of all the different chunks of different genes and genetic information on those chromosomes. So in terms of inheritance, some genes follow a super simple dominant recessive pattern, as we saw with our Ps, as we saw in the different traits that we examined for our pedigree charts, while others are a little bit more complex. And if this is a hint here, calico cats are a great example of complex inheritance patterns. So one example of something that's a little bit more tricky than just dominant or recessive is something that we've already seen, blood type. So blood type is an example of codominance. When you have two alleles expressed and not one is more dominant than the other, they're both equally dominant, they're codominant. So one example is the ABO blood group, determined by three different alleles, A, B, and then the lowercase I. This is how it's normally written in terms of like IA, IB, and then lowercase I, just to help us keep track of dominant or recessive. So IA and IB are codominant while lowercase I is recessive. And codominant essentially just means that if I inherit an A and a B, well then both of them will be in my blood type. If I only inherit one A and then a lowercase I, or two A's, then I'll have blood type A. And if I inherit two B's or one B, one I, then I'll have blood type B. If I inherit two I's, then I'll have blood type O. And this is a great Punnett square that shows all of those different possible combinations. So once again, codominance means that both of my alleles will be equally expressed. Neither one is more dominant than the other, which is why I can have A blood type, B blood type, or AB. And then O is recessive. So there's also something known as sex-linked inheritance. A sex-linked gene is a gene located on the sex chromosome. So genes on the Y chromosomes are only passed on to males because they're the only ones with a Y chromosome, while genes on the X chromosome are passed on to both sexes because both sexes get at least one X chromosome. And because males only have one X chromosome, any of the genes that are passed on that X chromosome are going to be expressed because there's no otherwise allele to compete with it. So essentially what that means is that whether or not the trait on the X chromosome is dominant or recessive, if you're a male and you inherit that X chromosome, it's going to be expressed in your phenotype as if it was dominant. Because once again, there's nothing to otherwise compete with it. Females, on the other hand, are much less likely to exhibit a sex-linked chromosome or a sex-linked gene because we inherit two X chromosomes, which mean that we might have then the dominant trait to compete with that other trait that otherwise would be expressed. So let me show you a visual. This always makes more sense with visuals. So for example, if we have a father who is unaffected, so they have the orange gene, and then we have a mother who carries the recessive gene for purple, but also has the dominant gene for orange. Well, she's a carrier. She's not necessarily showing the recessive trait, but she does carry it, if that makes sense. So then if we look at all of the ways that these different alleles are passed on, then we can see that this son, he inherited the dominant orange, so he's unaffected. The daughter inherited two dominant orange alleles, so she's unaffected. This daughter inherited one recessive allele and one dominant allele, so recessive dominant, but because she has the dominant here, she's a carrier. She doesn't actually show the trait in her phenotype, but she does carry it to pass on to future generations. And then finally, this son here, you can see that because he inherited that X chromosome that had the recessive purple trait, and his Y chromosome doesn't have anything to compete with it, he is affected. So the daughter is a carrier because she has one of each. The son is affected by the trait, and he shows that recessive trait in his phenotype because there's nothing to compete with it. Does that make sense? So a really common example of sex-linked inheritance is something that's known as color blindness. So essentially, color blindness and color vision, if we look back to this here, you can actually see color blindness is on the X chromosome, so it's sex-linked. Humans have three genes responsible for color vision. All of them are on the X chromosome. So if I inherit, as a female, one X chromosome with the mutated allele and the other one that's regular, then my regular X chromosome can kind of fill in all of the gaps that exist on my affected X chromosome. But if a male inherits this X chromosome that doesn't have all of the correct alleles or genes for color vision, then they would be colorblind. And this is why men have color blindness much more often than females do. And we can see based off of this Punnett square here why that happens. So for example, if the father has normal color vision, and then of course the Y chromosome doesn't carry anything regarding color vision, and then this mother is a carrier, so she has one normal gene for color vision, and then she has on the other X chromosome color blindness. So as we then see how these are passed on in the Punnett square, this first individual gets the Y from dad and then gets the normal color vision from mom. Meanwhile, this individual gets the Y from dad and the color blindness gene from mom. This individual down here gets normal X from mom, normal X from dad. Meanwhile, this one down here gets normal X from dad and then the color blindness X from mom. But because she has two X's, while she carries the gene for color blindness, she still has normal color vision because of the fact that she has a normal X chromosome as well. So there's something kind of crazy called X chromosome inactivation. And essentially this means because females inherit two X chromosomes, one is normally turned off so that it's not like it's competing. And the one that's turned off is turned into something called a bar body. And the determination of which X chromosome is inactivated and turned into a bar body is actually random in every single cell. So some of our cells might have the X chromosome from mom activated, while some of our other cells might have the X chromosome from dad activated, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Each individual cell can choose randomly, well, it's not a choice, it just happens randomly, which X chromosome is going to be expressed. And then, of course, by extension, all of the different genes on that X chromosome that will then be expressed. So if we look here, if this is the zygote, this is the fertilized sex cell here, we see what's then called that random inactivation, where one of those X chromosomes is turned into the bar body. So in this cell, the purple chromosome was turned into the bar body. Meanwhile, in this cell, the teal chromosome was turned into a bar body. And then as you see, as they go through mitosis, it kind of just continues to happen. That random inactivation occurs so that some of our cells will have the teal chromosome and then other cells have the purple chromosome. And this is the explanation for why we have calico cats. So calico cats are a great example of X chromosome inactivation because you can physically see which chromosomes are active and which ones are inactive based off of the color of their fur. So some cells express the X with the orange allele, while others express the X for the black allele. And that then results in a cat that has orange and black in their fur coat. This also explains why, for the most part, you're only going to have female calico cats. And that's because you need to have two X chromosomes for then one of them to be inactivated, right? Males don't go through this X chromosome inactivation because they only have one X chromosome and the other chromosome is Y. Females have two, so one of them gets turned into a bar body and the other one is expressed. So let me move this over here. So let's look at an example of how this occurs. So as I said before, because males have only one X chromosome, they don't go through that inactivation. So if this cat inherited the dominant allele for orange, then this cat would be orange. This male cat inherited the recessive allele for having black fur, so this one has black. But then if we look here, this female has two X chromosomes that each have black alleles, and one of them is inactivated, but the other one is still for black, so we have a black cat. Same thing here, both alleles are orange, one of them is inactivated, but because the other one's still orange, well, then we have an orange cat. But then in this one allele is for orange fur, the other allele is for black fur. So then when they go through the inactivation, when one's turned into a bar body and the other one is then physically expressed, in this random inactivation, the orange allele was inactivated, so the black is expressed. But in this cell, the orange is kept active while the black is inactivated. And so because of the fact that each cell can have either one activated or inactivated, you'll have some cells saying, let's express black colored fur, and other cells saying, hey, let's express orange colored fur. So what you end up with is a spotted colored cat. And this is just another example here for any of the locations on the cat's body that are orange. That means that that is the location where their cells are inactivating the black chromosome. Then same over here. If you see any black patches of fur on a calico cat, then you can say that that's the location where the orange is being inactivated, turned into a bar body, while the black is being expressed. So it's something that's so interesting in terms of each individual cell having a different expression of the two different genes that they inherit. And this is why some of those different predictions from 23andMe didn't necessarily show in my phenotypes, because it could be an instance of chromosome inactivation. There's also something called epigenetics that is super interesting too. That happens to be the next slide. And epigenetics just explains how essentially, even though we have our DNA and that's a certain set of instructions, sometimes the way that our body then turns that DNA, those instructions, into our physical traits can change based off of the way that our ancestors lived their lives and the way that we live our lives. So once again, I can't show this video, copywriting purposes, but I can link it on our Schoology. I definitely recommend that you watch this video. It's so interesting and talks a little bit more about how our body decides which genes to turn off and which ones to turn on. And that's it. So you'll be able to use this information from this slide PowerPoint to then answer the questions on your homework. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to let me know and I'll help walk you through those. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing what you guys create. Bye, guys.